Here's Iverson. Lou the defender. Stays right with him. Allen wants to go. Wants the baseline. Fade away. Yes!
He's way too good. He steps around Lou and drilled it. And the Sixers have scored 9 in a row.
7 straight points by Iverson. Looked like he was dead in the water.
The Sixers by 4. 40 seconds left.
June 6th, 2001. Staples Center, Los Angeles. The Los Angeles Lakers were the defending NBA champions. They had Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant in their primes. They had won 15 of their last 16 playoff games. They were, by almost every measure, the greatest team in basketball. On the other side of the court stood a man listed at 6 feet tall and 165 pounds. Allen Iverson scored 48 points that night. He had 6 assists, 5 rebounds, 5 steals. The 76ers won in overtime, and after one of the most extraordinary individual performances in NBA Finals history, Iverson stood over a fallen Tyronn Lue and stared. It became one of the defining images in the history of the sport.
Lou.
7 straight points by Iverson. Looked like he was dead in the water.
The Sixers by 4.
And yet, if you pull up the advanced metrics on Allen Iverson's career, you don't find the profile of a transcendent all-time great. You find a player who is one of the most efficient high-volume scorers of his era, whose efficiency metrics hover near league average, whose win shares rank him around 105th in NBA history, and who, by some analytical measures, was a neutral or slightly negative impact player for significant stretches of his career. So what do you do with that? What do you do with a player whose numbers pull in different directions depending on which numbers you're looking at? What do you do with a player who stepped over Shaq's teammate in the NBA Finals at 165 pounds? How good was Allen Iverson actually? When Michael Jordan retired for the second time in 1998, the NBA had a problem. Not an existential one, the league was healthy, but a cultural one. For 6 years, the story of basketball had been one man. Now that man was gone, and nobody knew who was supposed to fill the vacuum. Allen Iverson entered the league in 1996, 2 years before that second retirement. By the time Jordan walked away, Iverson was already a scoring champion and one of the most watched players in the sport. He didn't just fill the vacuum, he filled it in a way the league's establishment was not entirely prepared for. The NBA of the late 1990s was, in terms of pure basketball, one of the most physically demanding environments the game has ever produced. Hand checking was still legal. Defenders could put a hand on a ball handler's hip and ride them off their line. Teams played slower. In the 2001-2002 season, the league averaged approximately 95.5 points per game. For context, today's league averages over 115. Shooting percentages league-wide were lower. The league true shooting percentage in Iverson's prime hovered around 51 to 52%. This matters enormously when you evaluate his efficiency numbers. Because those numbers don't exist in isolation, they exist relative to what everyone else was doing at the same time. Iverson also occupied a role that didn't clearly exist in the NBA's traditional vocabulary. He was listed as a shooting guard, but functioned as a point guard, running the offense, initiating the half-court sets, pushing the pace in transition. At the same time, he was the primary scorer, the go-to option in the clutch, the player defense's game plan their entire scheme around. The closest contemporary comparisons were Kobe Bryant and Tracy McGrady, both volume scorers, both capable of carrying an offense, but neither of them was asked to run the offense the way Iverson was. He was, in effect, doing 2 jobs simultaneously in an era where defenses were allowed to be way more physical than anything we see today. That context is the frame for everything that follows. When you see his shooting percentages, remember the era. When you see his usage rate, remember what he was being asked to do. And when you see his scoring average, remember that nobody his size had ever done it before, or has since. Start with the number that stops the conversation before it starts. Allen Iverson's career scoring average is 26.7 points per game. That is the 4th highest career scoring average in NBA history among retired players, behind only Michael Jordan, Wilt Chamberlain, and Elgin Baylor. Of the 5 men above 26 points per game for their careers, one is arguably the greatest player who ever lived, and one averaged 50 points in a single season. He led the league in scoring 4 times, 1999, 2001, 2002, and 2005. He scored 30 or more points per game in 3 separate seasons. In 2005-2006, at age 30, he averaged 33 points per game, the highest single season average of his career. Over his career, he accumulated 24,368 points, seventh all time at the time of his retirement. He did it in 914 games, playing 41 minutes a night for 14 seasons. He did it at 6 feet tall, 165 pounds, against defenses that were legally allowed to put hands on him. The crossover is worth spending a moment on, because it wasn't just a highlight, it was a functional weapon that changed how guards played the game. Before Iverson, the crossover existed. After Iverson, every guard in the world was trying to learn his version of it, the between the legs hesitation, the change of pace. He popularized a style of ball handling that you can trace directly to every guard playing today. When a 21-year-old rookie crosses up the greatest player who ever lived and hits the jumper, you're watching something real. Here's where the conversation gets more complicated, and it deserves to be taken seriously. Allen Iverson's career field goal percentage was 42.5%. His career true shooting percentage, which accounts for three-pointers and free throws, and is the most complete single measure of shooting efficiency, was 51.8%. In his era, the league average true shooting percentage was approximately 51 to 52%. What that means, stripped to its core, Allen Iverson was one of the highest usage offensive players in the history of the NBA, and he produced at a roughly league average efficiency while doing it. One analysis concluded that a league average efficiency player taking as many shots as Iverson did over his career would have produced approximately 426 more points. His career win shares, a metric that attempts to credit players with the wins their performance contributed to, totals 99, which ranks him approximately 105th among NBA-only players all time. His player efficiency rating across his career was 20.9. For reference, Jordan's career PER was 27.9, LeBron's is 27.1, and Shaq's is 26.4. Box plus minus measures a player's estimated impact per 100 possessions relative to a league average player, based on box score statistics. His career BPM was plus 3.2, meaning the data suggests that he contributed roughly 3.2 points per 100 possessions above a league average player. That is a solid number. It is not an elite one. For reference, the players with career BPM figures in the plus 7 to plus 10 range, Jordan, LeBron, Shaq, Duncan, represent a tier Iverson does not reach by this measure. His value over replacement player, or VORP, which takes BPM and weighs it by minutes played, accumulated to approximately 49.6 over his career, which places him in a range consistent with a very good player over a long career rather than an all-time top 10 player. That's a significant gap. Third in scoring average, 105th in win shares, outside the true elite tier by BPM. If you only had those numbers and no other context, you might reasonably conclude that Iverson was a volume scorer who produced at a level below what the raw scoring average implies. But context, in this case, is not a footnote. It's part of the answer. The first piece of context is the usage-efficiency relationship. Research going back to Dean Oliver's 2004 work has documented that as a player's usage rate rises, their efficiency tends to fall. Most players become less efficient the more they shoot, because defenses adjust and the quality of looks declines. Iverson was carrying usage rates, the percentage of team possessions he used while on the floor, that were among the highest recorded in the modern NBA. Maintaining league average efficiency at that usage level is harder than it sounds, and the raw numbers don't automatically reflect that difficulty. The second piece of context is the free throw volume. Iverson drew 8.9 free throw attempts per game across his career. True shooting percentage accounts for this, which is why his true shooting percentage outperforms his raw field goal percentage. But the free throw volume also reflects something real. He was getting to the line constantly, against physical defenses that were allowed to be physical, because he was attacking the basket at a rate that almost no player at his size had ever sustained. The third piece of context is the steals. Iverson won 3 steals titles. He averaged 2.2 steals per game for his career, which places him among the all-time leaders. These are not statistical anomalies. They held up across seasons, against different opponents and different systems. Whatever the analytical debate about his defensive positioning, the steals were real, and they represent legitimate defensive value. His career defensive rating was 105.5. In his era, the league average defensive rating was approximately 110 to 113. That number needs a caveat. Defensive rating is a team-level metric, and Iverson played alongside Dikembe Mutombo during his best defensive seasons, which inflates the team-level number. But it's not consistent with a portrait of a player who's a pure defensive liability. By peak value, Iverson's best season was 2000-2001. He was 25 years old. He averaged 31.1 points, 4.6 assists, 3.8 rebounds, and 2.5 steals per game. He led the 76ers to a 56-26 record, the best in the Eastern Conference. He was named the league's most valuable player. His win shares per 48 minutes that season was approximately .190, which placed him just outside the top 10 players in the league. By the composite analytical rankings available for that era, he sat at 12th in the league, in the company of Shaquille O'Neal, Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, Kobe Bryant, and Tracy McGrady. That is genuinely elite company. The debate about Iverson is not whether he was good. The debate is about the distance between what the highlight reel suggests and what the full statistical picture confirms, and whether that distance is a failure of the metrics, a failure of the narrative, or something in between. Across 71 career playoff games, Iverson averaged 29.7 points, 6 assists, and 3.8 rebounds per game. He averaged 45.1 minutes per game in the postseason, a reflection of how completely his teams relied on him when the stakes were the highest. His playoff field goal percentage dropped to 40.1% versus his regular season 42.5%. His efficiency dipped against better competition and more targeted defensive schemes. That's an honest number, and it belongs in the evaluation. But the 2001 playoff run demands its own accounting. First round against Indiana, 31.5 points and 6.5 assists per game. Second round against Toronto, 33.7 points and 6.9 assists per game. He scored 54 in Game 2 and 52 in Game 5 to keep the Sixers season alive. They survived Game 7. Eastern Conference Finals against Milwaukee, 7 games, Series 1. Then the Finals. Game 1 in Los Angeles. The Lakers were favored by double digits. Iverson scored 48 points, pulled down 6 rebounds, dished 6 assists, and recorded 5 steals. The Sixers won in overtime, and in one of the great individual moments of the entire playoff run, he hit a pull-up jumper over Tyronn Lue in the fourth quarter, stepped over him as he fell, and walked away.
For Tyronn Lue.
7 straight points by Iverson. Looked like he was dead in the water.
The Sixers by 4. 40 seconds left in overtime.
Well, tonight the Sixers come in, win this game.
In the entire 2001 playoffs, Iverson led all players in both total points and total assists. Not points only, not assists only, both. The Lakers won games 2 through 5 without much trouble. The 76ers were outmatched beyond that first night, and nobody with an honest read of that roster is going to pretend otherwise. But what Iverson did to get there, carrying a franchise through 4 playoff series on sheer force, is one of the more remarkable individual postseason performances the sport has produced. Something that gets underweighted in the analytical conversation about Iverson is the physical reality of what he was doing. He averaged over 40 minutes per game for 9 consecutive seasons. In 2001-2002, he averaged 43.7 minutes per game, the highest in the league and one of the highest single-season averages in NBA history. In the playoffs, that number climbed to 45. He was playing essentially the entire game, every game, at an intensity level, driving into the paint, absorbing contact, getting up off the floor and doing it again. That intensity level wore most players down into their late 20s. He was 165 pounds, in an era where defenders were allowed to be physical with him. The durability alone, not just surviving it, but producing at that level through it, is a real and underappreciated part of his story.
It's easy to sum it up when you just talk about practice. We sitting here, I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice. I mean, listen, we talking about practice. Not a game, not a game, not a game. We talking about practice. Not a game. Not the game that I go out there and die for and play every game like it's my last. Not the game. We're talking about practice, man. I mean, how silly is that, man? We're talking about practice.
In May 2002, after the Sixers were eliminated in the second round, Allen Iverson sat in front of reporters and said the word practice 22 times. It became one of the most famous press conferences in sports history. The clip almost always gets played for laughs. The full context almost never gets mentioned. Iverson had just lost his close friend and teammate, Billy Lyons. He was exhausted. He was dealing with trade speculation and public criticism from his own coach. The press conference was not a man who didn't care about basketball. It was a man who was at the end of a very long rope, being asked about a practice session the morning after a season ended. Larry Brown, his coach for most of his Philadelphia tenure, reportedly called Iverson the greatest competitor he had ever coached and possibly the greatest athlete he had ever seen. Brown also expressed in later interviews that he wished he could have pushed Iverson further towards maximizing his potential, not because the talent wasn't there, but because the talent was so vast that sometimes it didn't need to be pushed to produce results. The honest version of Allen Iverson the person is not the caricature of a player who didn't care. It's a player who cared so intensely about the game on the court that everything surrounding it, practice, media, organizational politics, registered as noise. That cost him. It also made him, on the floor, one of the most ferocious competitors in the history of the sport. There's a version of this evaluation that skips the cultural section because the channel is about on-court performance. That version would be incomplete. Allen Iverson's impact on the NBA's cultural identity is not a soft add-on to his basketball story. It is part of his basketball story, because you cannot separate what he meant to the league from what the league became during and after his career. He arrived in the NBA in 1996 with cornrows, tattoos, and a connection to hip-hop culture that the league's establishment was openly uncomfortable with. He refused to change any of it. And over time, the audience he represented, young, urban, connected to that same culture, became the audience the NBA most wanted to reach. The NBA's 2005 dress code, which required players to wear business casual attire when representing the league off the court, was widely understood as a response to the aesthetic Iverson had popularized. The irony is that by the time the dress code was implemented, that aesthetic had already won. The players who came after Iverson, who grew up watching him, brought hip-hop culture into arenas and marketing campaigns and global broadcast deals in ways that transformed the sport's commercial footprint. He was named to the NBA 75th anniversary team in 2021, one of the 75 greatest players in the history of the league per official recognition. That selection accounts for both his on-court performance and what he meant to the game more broadly. It's the right call. The analytical community's honest consensus on Iverson sits somewhere between two poles. On one end, he was one of the greatest individual scorers in NBA history, a legitimate MVP, and a player who carried a franchise to the finals almost entirely by himself in 2001. His steals were real, his durability was exceptional, his peak placed him in the top 10 players in the league. On the other end, his efficiency metrics hovered near league average at enormous usage. His win shares rank him around 105th all time, and the adjusted plus-minus numbers put him well outside the top 50 players in the datasets that include his era. The APBR analytical community generally places him between 15th and 45th all time in their assessment threads, a spread that itself reflects genuine disagreement about how much weight to give the efficiency numbers versus the peak performance and usage context. His Hall of Fame induction in 2016 first year of eligibility, was never in serious doubt. The Naismith Memorial Basketball Hall of Fame uses a committee structure rather than a public ballot, so there's no vote percentage to point to the way there was with Jeter. But the selection was unanimous in the way that it matters. Nobody credible argued against it. The place where the analytical and mainstream communities most sharply diverge is on where Iverson sits in the all-time hierarchy. Casual fan rankings and media all-time lists regularly place him in the top 20, sometimes top 15. The advanced metrics, by most formulations, put him closer to the 40th to 80th range depending on methodology. That gap is real, and it's larger than it is for most Hall of Famers. But there is also an argument, made carefully in the analytical community, that the metrics themselves have a harder time capturing what Iverson was doing. Usage-adjusted models help. Playoff-adjusted models help. We use playoff-weighted metrics like E-wins. Iverson climbed significantly in the all-time rankings compared to where his win shares put him, which suggests his value showed up more clearly when the stakes were the highest. Allen Iverson was not the player the pure efficiency metrics say he was. He was also not quite the player the highlight reel and the cultural mythology says he was. The honest answer lives somewhere between those two things, and it requires holding all of them at once. He is the fourth highest scoring average in NBA history among retired players. He was one of the highest usage players the modern game has ever seen, operating at league average efficiency, which, at that usage, is harder to sustain than it sounds. He carried a team to the NBA Finals that had no other legitimate offensive weapon, and in the process put together one of the great individual playoff runs in the sport's history. He played 40-plus minutes a night for the better part of a decade at 165 pounds and didn't break. The win shares number, 105th all-time, is real, and it tells you something true about efficiency. The step-over image is also real, and it tells you something true about what he was capable of on the biggest stage. His career longevity took a hit, not from injury, but from his refusal to accept a diminished role at the end. That's a complicated thing. It cost him counting stats that would have padded his all-time totals. It also tells you something about who he was, a player who defined himself entirely by what he could do at full capacity, and who was not interested in a version of his career that looked like anything less. The cultural piece is not decoration. It is part of the evidence. The NBA today, its aesthetic, its global reach, its relationship to music and fashion and youth culture, is partly a product of what Iverson built by refusing to be something he wasn't. That matters, and it belongs in any complete accounting of what he was. So, how good was Allen Iverson actually? He was a legitimate MVP. He was one of the greatest scorers the sport has ever produced. He was a player whose efficiency metrics lagged behind his reputation, and whose reputation was sometimes inflated beyond what the full picture supports. He was a Hall of Famer whose best season placed him in the top 10 players in basketball, and whose career value sits closer to the 40th to 100th range all time depending on the methodology. He was an undersized man who led the league in scoring 4 times, crossed up Michael Jordan as a rookie, and scored 48 points in the NBA Finals. The number 105th doesn't fully explain him. Neither does the myth. What he actually was, the complete picture, is more interesting than either one. The metrics will tell you he was somewhere around 40th to 105th all time. Watch the 2001 playoffs and tell me those numbers captured everything that was happening.